Block her number, Mom commanded, her voice void of warmth. That night, for talking back, my stepfather's hand struck my face while she watched in silence. What they didn't know was that my family on the other side never stopped texting. The screenshots from that group chat weren't just gossip, they were evidence. They were the beginning of the end, and they would change absolutely everything. My name is Clara Wynn. I am 29 years old, an administrative assistant at a small logistics firm, and for the last 7 years, I have been a ghost in my own home. I live with my mother and my stepfather, Rick, in a beige 2-story house on a street where all the lawns are cut to the same uniform height. The silence in our house is a living thing, a thick, heavy blanket that smothers sound and emotion with equal efficiency. It's a silence born of carefully constructed denial, and tonight it was about to be broken. The argument, like most of them, began with a whisper. It started not with a shout, but with my mother's low, disappointed tone, the one she reserved for my most profound failures. We were in the kitchen, the scent of bleach still hanging in the air from her evening cleaning ritual. I was rinsing my plate, my back to her. "You don't respect him." "Clara," she said. The water running from the tap was the only loud thing in the room. "You don't respect my husband." I turned the faucet off. The sudden quiet was deafening. I placed the plate carefully in the dishwasher, my movements slow and deliberate. I said hello when he came in. "Mom." "You said hi," she corrected, her voice thin and sharp as a razor wire. There was a tone, as if his presence were an inconvenience to you. "This is his house. You live under his roof." His house, never our house. It was a distinction she made often. I dried my hands, feeling the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "I'm sorry if it came across that way. I was finishing up an email for work." Rick appeared in the doorway then, as if summoned by the tension. He was a large man, his presence filling the space, sucking the air out of it. He held a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly. He'd been unwinding since he got home from his construction management job an hour ago. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that always felt like a threat. My mother turned to him, her expression shifting from disappointment to a kind of placating tenderness. "Nothing, honey, just a little chat. Clara was just saying how she needs to be more mindful." He looked past her, his eyes locking on me. They were small, hard eyes, the kind that didn't just look at you, but assessed you, weighed you, and found you wanting. Mindful of what? Of who pays the bills around here. I didn't answer. This was the dance. He would escalate, she would placate, and I was expected to shrink until I disappeared. But tonight, I was too tired to shrink. I just stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. My phone, resting on the granite beside me, lit up. A message. Rick's eyes darted to it. Before I could react, his large hand shot out and snatched it. "Who's this?" he demanded, his voice no longer a rumble but a snarl. "It's no one," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "Just a friend." He scoffed, turning the phone over in his hand. The screen lit up again, displaying the name on the notification banner. Aunt Dana, my father's sister. Rick's face contorted. A deep, purplish red crept up his neck. No one. "You think I'm stupid," he roared, the sound echoing in the sterile kitchen. I told you I don't want that trash talking to you, filling your head with poison about me." He wasn't just angry. He was incandescent with a rage that seemed to come from a place so deep and old, it had nothing to do with me or a simple text message. It was a rage that was always there, simmering, waiting for an excuse. "Rick, please," my mother started, taking a step toward him. He ignored her. His focus was entirely on me. "You are not to speak to your father's family, ever. Do you understand me?" Before I could form a response, he drew his arm back and hurled my phone to the floor. It hit the polished tile with a sickening crack, skittering under the kitchen table. The sound was violent, final. A spiderweb of fractures bloomed across the dark screen. I stared at the wreckage of my phone, my only real lifeline to the outside world. and felt something inside me break with it. The room was spinning slightly. Rick was breathing heavily, his chest puffed out like a conqueror. And then my mother spoke. Her voice was not placating now. It was as cold and hard as the tile floor. She wasn't looking at her husband's rage. She was looking at me, the problem, the source of the disruption to her carefully maintained peace. "Block her number," she ordered. "Right now, get that phone and block her. I'm done with her drama. I'm done with all of it." The command was so absolute, so devoid of any maternal warmth, that it stunned me more than Rick's violence. It was a final severing. She was choosing him. She was choosing the silence. My body moved on its own. I walked numbly to the table, bent down, and retrieved the phone. My fingers trembled as I held it, the sharp edges of the broken screen pressing into my palm. I could feel their eyes on me, a unified front of judgment. With a shaking thumb, I swiped the screen, ignoring the tiny shards of glass. I found Aunt Dana's contact information. My finger hovered over the block this caller option. It felt like a betrayal of my own blood, of the only family that still felt like my own. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed the button. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stood up, holding the ruined phone, and dared to look at my mother. I needed her to see me. I needed her to understand the magnitude of what she had just asked me to do. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "It's just Aunt Dana. She was just checking in." That was my mistake. I had spoken back. I had tried to reason. In this house, reason was defiance. Rick moved faster than I thought a man his size could move. He crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides. I didn't even have time to flinch before his open hand connected with the side of my face. The force of the slap was explosive. A flash of white light burst behind my eyes, and the sound was like a gunshot in my ear. My head snapped to the side, and the momentum sent me stumbling backward. I lost my balance, my legs tangling beneath me, and I collapsed onto the floor, my hips striking the leg of a chair with a dull, sickening thud. The world went silent for a moment. All I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The spot on my cheek was on fire, a radiating heat that spread across my entire face. I tasted something metallic and warm in my mouth. Blood. From my position on the floor, I looked up. I looked past Rick's heaving form, past his clenched fists, and found my mother. She stood by the sink, her back half turned to me. She was gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She didn't rush to my side. She didn't scream at him. She didn't do anything. She just stood there, a statue carved from ice, her gaze fixed on the stainless steel faucet as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. She did not look at me. She did not acknowledge the fact that her daughter was on the floor, bleeding, because her husband had struck her. That was the real blow. The silence. Her silence was the confirmation. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. My hip ached, my cheek throbbed, but the deepest pain was a cold hollowness in my chest. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. I walked out of the kitchen, my movements stiff and robotic. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I walked up the stairs, each step a monumental effort. I went into my room and shut the door behind me. I turned the lock, the soft click echoing in the profound silence. I leaned against the door, my body shaking with silent sobs. I refused to let them hear. I slid down to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. I went to the bathroom and saw my reflection. A livid red handprint was already blooming on my cheek. A thin trickle of blood dripped from my nose onto my chin. I wiped it away, the coppery scent filling my senses. The tears came then, hot and furious, mingling with the blood as I stared at the stranger in the mirror. After an eternity, the shaking subsided, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. My phone was destroyed, my connection to my aunt severed. They had isolated me. They had won. But they had forgotten one thing. On my nightstand, next to a stack of unread books, was my iPad. I had used it earlier to look up a recipe and hadn't closed the messaging app. My fingers, still trembling slightly, reached for it. The screen lit up, its cool blue light a stark contrast to the darkness of the room. The Wynn family group chat was open. The last few messages were from earlier in the day, cousins sharing pictures of their kids, jokes from my uncle. And then, as the device connected to the Wi-Fi, 3 dots appeared at the bottom of the screen. Someone was typing. A new message popped up, stark and clear in the suffocating quiet of my room. It was from my cousin, June. "Is Clara okay?" "Rick's drinking again." The morning after was quieter than usual, which was a feat in a house already built on silence. The air itself seemed to have bruised. Our home, a model of suburban tranquility from the outside, was a labyrinth of unspoken rules on the inside. We moved through its hallways like ghosts, our paths timed to avoid intersection. I would wait until I heard the shower running in their master bathroom before I crept downstairs to make coffee. My mother would leave for her first job before Rick came down for his. We didn't look at each other. Eye contact was a form of currency we could no longer afford to trade. It was too intimate, too revealing. The walls were thin. I could hear the scrape of a coat hanger in my mother's closet. The weary sigh Rick let out as he tied his work boots, but they were thick enough to absorb a scream. This house ran on a very specific economy of fear, and Rick was the sole proprietor. He controlled everything, especially the money. I'd seen it happen gradually. First, he convinced my mother to merge their bank accounts for simplicity. Then, her credit cards started getting declined. He'd cut them up in front of her, telling her it was for her own good, that she was too frivolous. Now, she had a weekly cash allowance for groceries, like a child. He'd turned his financial contribution into a weapon, a daily reminder of her dependence. My own paycheck was not my own, either. The majority of it went directly to him for room and board, a sum that was far more than any rent I would pay for a single room elsewhere. He called it my contribution. I knew it for what it was, an anchor, forged to keep me chained here, unable to save enough to build a lifeboat. My mother, a woman who had once been so fiercely independent, was now a shadow working to uphold a fragile, violent peace. She worked 2 jobs a day shift as a receptionist at a dental clinic and 3 nights a week cleaning office buildings downtown. Her hands were raw, her face perpetually etched with a deep, abiding exhaustion. Yet, the few times I had tried to gently push back against the narrative, to hint at the suffocating pressure of Rick's temper, she would shut me down with the same tired mantra. "He's just stressed. Clara," she'd say, her eyes refusing to meet mine. "The pressure of his job, the mortgage. It's a lot for a man to carry. We have to understand that." She spoke of his stress as if it were a noble affliction, a burden he bore for our benefit, and his rage was merely a symptom to be tolerated. She chose to see his control as care, his anger as passion. To admit otherwise would be to admit that the last 7 years of her life, the life she had defended and sacrificed for, had been a lie. Her denial was a fortress, and I could find no way in. My only sanctuary was a small, gray cubicle at a logistics firm 20 miles away. It was an aggressively beige and uninspiring place, but to me, it was paradise, at work. I was not a daughter or a stepdaughter. I was just Clara Wynn, the woman who handled shipping invoices with quiet efficiency. No one shouted, no one demanded an account of my time or my loyalties. The low hum of the servers, the rhythmic click of keyboards, the polite, impersonal smiles from my colleagues, these things were my peace. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit world of spreadsheets and purchase orders, I could breathe. It was in the quiet solitude of my lunch breaks, sitting in my car in the sprawling parking lot, that the first seeds of a real plan began to grow. Survival required evolution. My first act of rebellion was small, silent, but it changed the entire chemical composition of my life. I started skimming, $20 here, $40 there, from the cash I was supposed to give Rick for my board. I'd mark it down as overtime not paid out yet, or increased health insurance deduction. He was too arrogant to ever check my pay stubs. Over 2 months, I saved $300 in cash, a secret treasure hidden in an old shoebox. One Saturday, telling my mother I was going to the library, I drove to a Walmart in the next county. I walked to the electronics section and bought the cheapest prepaid smartphone they had, a burner. Paying in cash felt like a scene from a spy movie. The phone was a small, black, anonymous rectangle of plastic, but as I held it in my hand, it felt heavier than a brick, dense with possibility and danger. I kept it hidden in the lining of an old winter coat at the back of my closet, tucked away behind clothes I hadn't worn in years. I only ever turned it on when I was safely at work, locked in a bathroom stall, or sitting in my car. The first call I made was to my Aunt Dana. Hearing her voice, warm and unfiltered and full of love, was like finding water in a desert. I cried without making a sound as she told me how worried she'd been. The real weapon, however, came from my cousin June. During one of our whispered conversations, she said, "Hold on, I'm sending you something." A moment later, the little black phone buzzed. It was a screenshot of the Wynn family group chat from the night of the attack. My Uncle Robert had written Dana. "Have you heard from Clara? Her mom isn't answering my texts." Another cousin had replied, "Rick's probably on one of his tirades again. I swear, that man is a ticking time bomb." Then came the message from June that gutted me and galvanized me all at once. It was a screenshot of a private text between her and her mother. My Aunt Dana. June. "I'm so scared for her. But you know, Clara's mom, she won't listen. She'll just call it family drama and cut us off for trying to interfere." Below it, June had added her own caption for me. "We all know what he's doing. Clara, we see it. But your mom won't listen. She's the one who keeps letting him get away with it." They knew. All of them. They hadn't been silent out of indifference. They had been silenced by my mother's denial. Rick was the abuser, but my mother was the warden. A new kind of coldness settled over me. It wasn't despair, it was purpose. That afternoon, I created a new, anonymous email address at my desk. During the lulls between invoicing cycles, I began a meticulous process. I forwarded every screenshot June sent me to that new address. I scrolled back through years of texts on my iPad, taking pictures of every concerned message, every unanswered "Are you okay?" Every instance where my mother had deflected or lied in the group chat. "Everything's fine," she'd write, just hours after I'd hidden a new bruise on my arm. "Rick is a good man." Each message was a brick in the wall of her denial. Each one was now a piece of my arsenal. I saved them all. I documented dates, times, and contexts. The screenshots became digital evidence, a cold, hard narrative that contradicted the fiction of our happy family. My life split into two. By day, I was the quiet administrator, methodically building a case against my own family in a password-protected folder. Each saved image felt like a small act of justice, a reclamation of my own story. But each night, I had to return to the house of silence, where I was the ghost, the child, the victim. I would lie in my bed, the secret phone cold and inert in its hiding place, and listen to the sounds of the house. The creak of the floorboards outside my door would make my heart pound. The low murmur of their voices, his angry and accusatory, hers placating and weary, was my nightly lullaby. Every night was a gamble, a tightrope walk over a pit of fire. But something had shifted inside me. The fear was still there, a constant, low-grade hum beneath my skin, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. I was no longer just surviving the nights. I was using the days. I was gathering the truth, one screenshot at a time. I started to look at Rick not just with fear, but with a cold, analytical detachment. I watched my mother not with pleas in my eyes, but with a growing, terrible pity. They thought they had trapped me in their silence. They had no idea that I was simply biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to make that silence scream. I wasn't just planning to get out. I was planning to return everything they had ever given me. It was the sound that woke me, not a loud sound, but a precise one. The faint, metallic click of the lock on my bedroom door being turned from the outside. In our house, privacy was a privilege, not a right. and Rick had a key to every room. I lay perfectly still in the darkness, my eyes wide open, tracking the slow shadow that blocked the sliver of moonlight from the hallway. He didn't turn on the light. The room was filled with the heavy, sour smell of whiskey and his uncontainable rage. He stood there for a long moment, a hulking silhouette breathing stale alcohol into the quiet air. My heart wasn't pounding with panic anymore. It had become a cold, heavy stone in my chest, beating a slow, funereal rhythm. "You think you're better than me?" "Huh?" His voice was a thick, slurred mess, but the venom in it was perfectly clear. It was the question he always came back to, the rotten core of his insecurity. He saw my quietness as judgment, my education as arrogance, my very existence as a reproach. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I kept my breathing shallow and even, a survival tactic learned over 7 long years. My silence was a canvas, and he painted all his failures onto it. He took a shuffling step into the room. Bumping into my desk, a stack of books tumbled to the floor with a soft thud. "Answer me when I'm talking to you," he hissed, the words stumbling over each other. "Think you're so smart, sitting up here with your books and your quiet little job, looking down on me, on your mother?" He was a predator, circling, working himself up. I pushed myself up slowly, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My goal was to put the bed between us, to create a barrier, however flimsy. I had to get to the door. "I don't think that—" "Rick," I said, my voice low and steady. I had learned that a shaky voice was like blood in the water. Liar. He lunged, not with the speed he'd shown in the kitchen, but with a drunk's clumsy, overwhelming force. He grabbed the front of my pajama shirt, his knuckles digging into my collarbone. He yanked me toward him, and his face was inches from mine. It was a mask of pure loathing, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. The stench of his breath washed over me, and I had to fight the urge to gag. "You and your whole damn family," he spat, flecks of spittle hitting my cheek, whispering about me, laughing at me. I tried to twist away, to break his grip. It was a mistake. My resistance was the permission he was waiting for. It was the final justification. He shoved me backward, and I stumbled, catching my balance just before I hit the wall. He drew his right arm back, his body coiling. I saw the fist coming. It wasn't an open-handed slap of humiliation this time. This was a punch, meant to break things. I turned my head, a pathetic, instinctual attempt to shield myself. The impact was not a sharp crack, but a deep, sickening thud. It caught me on the point of my left shoulder, just where it met my arm. A bolt of white-hot, electric pain shot through me, radiating down to my fingertips and up into my neck. It wasn't just surface pain. It was a deep, bone-jarring shockwave that felt like it had vibrated straight through to my soul. My arm went numb, then erupted in a wave of throbbing agony. The force of the blow slammed me sideways into the wall. My head connected with the drywall with a dull knock, and for a second, the room tilted. The shadows swimming before my eyes. I gasped, a ragged, strangled sound. But I couldn't draw a full breath. The air had been stolen from my lungs. That's when the door flew open. My mother stood there, silhouetted by the hallway light, her face a pale oval of horror. For one single, crystalline moment, she was a mother bear. "Stop!" she shrieked, her voice raw with a panic I hadn't heard in years. She rushed into the room and threw herself between us, pushing at Rick's massive chest with her small, work-roughened hands. "Stop it. Rick, my God, what are you doing?" He stumbled back, momentarily confused by her intervention, but the moment of maternal fury was fleeting. As soon as she had his attention, the entire dynamic shifted. The fear in her eyes morphed into a different, more familiar kind of terror, the fear of his anger turning on her. She crumpled. Her shoulders slumped, and she began to cry, her hands fluttering at her sides. And then she did the thing that finally, irrevocably, severed the last thread of hope I ever had for her. She turned to him, her face streaked with tears. and began to apologize. "I'm so sorry, honey," she sobbed, reaching out to touch his arm. She provokes you. She doesn't understand. I'm so sorry." She was apologizing to him, for him hitting me. I watched them from the floor where I had slid down the wall, clutching my shoulder. The pain was a living thing, a fire consuming my entire left side, but it was nothing compared to the cold, absolute clarity that washed over me as I watched my mother comfort my abuser. This was it. There would be no more waiting. There would be no more hoping she would wake up. My escape plan had just been upgraded from a distant dream to an immediate, non-negotiable necessity. Rick allowed her to lead him out of the room, his rage deflating into a sullen, drunken stupor, her soft, placating murmurs following them down the hall. I didn't wait to hear their door close. I scrambled to my feet, my left arm hanging uselessly at my side. Every movement sent a fresh wave of agony through me, but I ignored it. I was functioning on pure adrenaline now. I grabbed the duffel bag from the back of my closet. I threw in clothes, toiletries, the shoebox with my $300, my laptop. I grabbed my burner phone and its charger. I moved with a silent, frantic efficiency. I slipped out of my room and crept down the stairs, each step a carefully placed maneuver. I could hear them in their room, his low grumbling, her continued, tearful apologies. At the bottom of the stairs, I put on my shoes, unlocked the front door as quietly as I could, and slipped out into the cold, damp night. I didn't look back. The 20-minute drive to June's apartment felt like a lifetime. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and I had to drive with just my right arm. The throbbing in my shoulder was a constant, brutal rhythm. When I pulled up to her building, I just sat in the car for a minute, the engine off, and let out a single, shuddering breath. I had done it. I was out. June opened the door on the first knock, her face a mixture of fear and relief. She took one look at my face, at the way I was cradling my arm, and pulled me inside without a word. She locked the door behind me and wrapped me in a hug. Being careful of my shoulder, I didn't cry. I was past tears. I was in a place of cold, hard action. "He hit you," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," I said, my voice flat. "It's over. June, I'm not going back." "Good," she said fiercely. "You're staying here. You're safe." She led me to her bathroom. In the harsh fluorescent light, I saw myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes huge and dark, but it was my shoulder that held my attention. I carefully peeled back the collar of my shirt. A deep, ugly, purple and red bruise was already blooming across the skin, a grotesque flower of violence. It was worse than I had imagined. "We have to document this." "Clara," June said, her voice grim. She handed me her phone. "Take pictures. Of everything. Your shoulder, your hip from the other night, the handprint on your face if it's still there." I did as she said, my movements clinical. I took photo after photo from every angle, the flash illuminating the damage in stark detail. They were horrible, ugly images, but they were also perfect. They were undeniable. They were truth. While I was doing that, June was on her laptop. "Okay," she said, turning to me. "I found the number for a statewide domestic violence hotline. They have a service that offers free, confidential legal consultations. You need to call them, now." I nodded, took the number, and dialed it on my burner phone. A calm, kind voice answered. I told her, in as few words as possible, what had happened. She listened without interruption. Then she gave me the name and number of a pro bono lawyer, a woman who specialized in cases like mine. I took a deep breath and sent an email from my anonymous account. "I need help," I wrote. "I have evidence." I attached the photos I had just taken. I hit send. June brought me a bag of frozen peas for my shoulder and a cup of tea. We sat in her small, quiet living room. The silence here was different. It was peaceful. "We'll help you," she said, her voice soft but firm. "All of us. Dad's side of the family. We'll help you figure this out. But for now, you need to just stay quiet. Don't answer any calls from your mother. Don't post anything. We need to be smart." I nodded, the ice pack sending blessed tendrils of cold into the fire in my shoulder. I know. I was silent. My body was screaming in pain. My mind was reeling from the escape, but beneath it all, a different part of my brain was already working. It was the calm, methodical part that organized invoices and tracked shipments. It was now processing a different kind of data, calculating variables, planning the next move. Rick had made a mistake. He had escalated, and in doing so, he had given me the final piece of evidence I needed for my physical case. Just then, June's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up. Her brow furrowed. She stared at the screen for a long moment, and then her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she whispered. She turned the phone toward me. It was the Wynn family group chat. My uncle, the one who lived in another state, had just posted a photo. It was grainy, obviously taken from across a crowded room with a phone camera. The caption read, "Isn't that Rick saw him at O'Malley's pub on my way home from the airport? Who's the blonde?" The picture was unmistakable. It was Rick, leaning close to a woman who was most definitely not my mother. His arm was slung around her shoulder, his face flushed with alcohol and laughter. He was touching her face. I looked at the photo, at this man who had, not an hour before, punched me in my own bedroom for being disrespectful, and I felt nothing, no shock, no surprise, just a quiet, clicking finality, like a chess piece locking into its final, checkmate position. He hadn't just given me evidence of his violence. He had just handed me the weapon that would decimate his character, obliterate my mother's last defense, and burn their entire world to the ground. "Save that. June," I said, my voice colder than the ice on my shoulder. "Save it and send it to me right now." She did. I watched the image download to my secret phone. I opened my anonymous email, created a new message to the lawyer, and attached the new file. Subject: additional evidence. I saved a copy to my hidden folder. I was no longer just a victim collecting proof of her abuse. I was a prosecutor building an airtight case. The 2 days I spent at June's apartment were a period of transformation. The throbbing in my shoulder subsided into a deep, persistent ache, a physical reminder of my new reality. But the fear, the suffocating, paralyzing fear that had been my constant companion for 7 years, began to recede. In its place, something cold, hard, and sharp was taking shape. It was resolve. The email from the lawyer, Ms. Albright, was brief and direct. The photographs were damning. She said, "The picture of Rick with the other woman established a pattern of deceit. But to build an irrefutable case, to strip away any defense he might try to mount, she needed one more thing, proof of his utter lack of remorse. Abusers often excel at appearing repentant to authorities," she wrote. "We need to show who he is when he thinks no one is watching." And so, the plan was born. Fear was no longer an obstacle. It was a tool, a costume I would wear to get what I needed. My end of the operation began with a phone call. I used my secret phone, dialing my mother's number and holding my breath. I had to become the person she expected me to be: broken, scared, and ready to crawl back. When she answered, her voice was a tight knot of anxiety. "Clara." "Oh, thank God. Where are you? Are you okay?" I let a sob catch in my throat, a dry, rasping sound I had practiced in June's bathroom mirror. "Mom," I whispered, making my voice tremble. I don't know what to do. I'm so sorry. I just need to get some more of my clothes. For work." The relief in her voice was a palpable thing, a wave of warmth and absolution flowing through the line. "Of course, sweetheart. Of course. Just come home. We can talk this out. We can fix this. As if we were a team." "Okay," I whispered. "I'll be there in an hour." While I was playing the part of the prodigal daughter, June was running the war room. Her small home office, usually reserved for her graphic design work, was now mission control. The printer hummed for nearly an hour, spitting out page after page of evidence. She printed every screenshot from the group chat, every text message where family members expressed concern, every dismissive reply from my mother. She printed the high-resolution photos of my bruises and the grainy photo of Rick at the bar, his arms slung around his conquest. She even found and printed a public record search showing 2 old disorderly conduct charges against him from before he met my mother. The digital ether of our family's dysfunction was being rendered into a cold, hard, physical stack of paper that was nearly 2 inches thick. It was an indictment. My main prop had arrived that morning via express delivery, a small, innocuous digital picture frame. It was the kind you see in any suburban home, cycling through bland photos of family vacations and smiling children, but this one had a tiny, nearly invisible pinhole lens on the side of the frame and a motion-activated, high-definition camera hidden within. Its battery life was 72 hours. I only needed it to work for 1. I spent 30 minutes setting it up, connecting it to a private, password-protected cloud server via the burner phone's hotspot. I loaded it with a dozen harmless photos of landscapes and sunsets. It was my Trojan horse. Driving back to that beige house felt surreal. The sky was a flat, bruised gray, and the air was thick with the promise of rain. I wasn't the same person who had fled down these streets 2 nights ago. That person was a refugee. I was a soldier on an infiltration mission. I parked at the curb, took a deep breath, and arranged my face into a mask of weary submission. I slung an empty duffel bag over my good shoulder and walked to the door. My mother opened it before I could knock. Her face was a mess of conflicting emotions: relief, guilt, and a desperate, pleading hope. "Clara," she breathed, pulling me into a hug that I did not return. Over her shoulder, I saw him. Rick was standing in the living room, arms crossed over his chest, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He had won. The runaway had returned, tail between her legs. He nodded at me, a king acknowledging a penitent subject. "Go on up and get what you need," my mother said, her voice unnaturally bright. "I'll make us some tea." This was my chance, actually, I said, my voice soft. "Could I get a glass of water first?" As she bustled into the kitchen, I walked into the living room. Rick watched my every move. I clutched the new picture frame in my hand. On the mantelpiece was an almost identical frame, displaying a photo of my mother and Rick on a cruise 5 years ago. My heart was a cold, steady drum against my ribs. "That's a nice frame," Rick said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A peace offering." I gave a weak, watery smile, something like that, with movements that felt both excruciatingly slow and lightning fast. I unplugged the old frame, picked it up, and put the new one in its place. I plugged it in. The screen flickered to life, showing a picture of a generic beach at sunset. The tiny lens was aimed perfectly, capturing the entire living room and the entrance to the kitchen. I tucked the old frame into my duffel bag. The swap had taken less than 15 seconds. Just as my mother returned with the water, my burner phone, tucked deep in my pocket and set to vibrate, buzzed once. It was a notification. The camera was online and recording. The trap was set. My mother handed me the glass, her hand trembling slightly. Then, as if on cue, her own phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was my Aunt Dana. My mother's face hardened. She declined the call and then looked at me, her expression turning to one of stern disappointment, as if this were all my fault. "You see, Clara, this is the drama you cause," she said, her voice low. "She stood between me and Rick, a misguided protector. You should apologize for worrying us, for running off, for all of this. Rick has a big heart. He's willing to forgive you." The audacity of it was breathtaking. She wanted me to apologize to him. I looked from her pleading, desperate face to his arrogant smirk. I could feel the invisible lens of the camera recording it all. This was the moment. I let a tear slide down my cheek, a perfect, crystalline drop of deceit. "I know," I said, my voice thick with fake emotion. "I'm so sorry. I just want things to go back to normal." It was the perfect line. It was the absolution they craved, the confirmation that their world was the correct one, and I was the broken piece that needed fixing. A slow smile spread across Rick's face. He stepped forward and put his arm around my mother's shoulders, pulling her against his side in a gesture of ownership. "Good girl," he said, but he was looking at me. It was a declaration of victory. My mother leaned into him, her body language screaming relief. Rick then turned his head slightly, speaking to my mother but projecting for my benefit. His voice was a low, self-satisfied rumble. "See, I told you. She's just a spoiled brat who's never been disciplined properly. All she needed was for someone to knock some sense into her, a little smack to wake her up and remind her who's in charge. That's all it was." He was bragging, he was confessing, and the little glass eye on the mantelpiece was drinking in every single word, every smug expression, every detail of my mother's silent, willing complicity. A jolt of pure, cold adrenaline shot through me. This was it. This was everything. I murmured something about getting my clothes and fled upstairs. I didn't trust myself to stay in the room with them any longer, to keep the mask from slipping. In my room, I moved on autopilot, pulling random clothes from my drawers and stuffing them into the bag. My hands were perfectly steady. After 5 minutes, I went back downstairs. "I've got what I need," I said, avoiding their eyes. I'll call you." "Stay for tea, Clara," my mother begged. "I can't. I have to go," I said, already moving toward the door. I had what I came for. Every second I remained in that house was a risk. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. As I reached my car, the first drops of rain began to fall, dark spots appearing on the pavement. I got in, tossed the duffel bag onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. The rain came faster now, washing over the windshield in sheets. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The beige house, the perfect lawn, the symbol of my long imprisonment, grew smaller and smaller until it was gone. I drove through the downpour, the windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm. I put my hand on my chest, feeling my own heartbeat. It wasn't the frantic, terrified flutter of a prey animal. It was the strong, steady, powerful beat of a hunter who had just watched her target walk directly into a perfectly laid trap. The feeling wasn't happiness or relief. It was a profound and chilling certainty. I had the recording, I had the photos, I had the truth, and my heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the cold, exhilarating knowledge that this time I had proof of everything. The day after my infiltration was a study in controlled tension. June and I moved around her small apartment with the quiet purpose of soldiers preparing for a final assault. We had the video from the picture frame, our ace in the hole, already downloaded, encrypted, and sent to Ms. Albright. That was the legal weapon. Precise and devastating. But I needed a social weapon first. I needed to detonate a bomb in the center of the family's denial, and the Wynn family group chat was the perfect arena. The asset I chose for this was an older video, something I had recorded on my iPad nearly a month before. It was a night much like the others, a night where Rick had been unwinding heavily. I had been in my room when the shouting started downstairs, his voice a guttural roar. My mother's a series of high-pitched, placating chirps. Terrified, I had propped my iPad against my slightly ajar bedroom door and hit record. The footage was shaky, the lighting poor, but the audio was perfectly, horribly clear. It was 27 seconds of pure, unfiltered toxicity. That evening, June and I sat side by side at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating our determined faces. We created a new email address, something anonymous and untraceable. We used a VPN, routing the signal through 3 different countries. We created a new, blank profile for the messaging app, with no name and no photo, just a gray, generic avatar. It was a digital ghost, born for a single purpose. "Are you sure about this?" Clara June asked, her hand hovering over the mouse. The video file was attached to a new message, ready to be dropped into the chat. I looked at the livid purple bruise covering my shoulder, a masterpiece of his rage. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said, my voice devoid of any tremor. "Do it." She clicked. The ghost account joined the Wynn family group chat. A moment later, it posted the video file. followed by a single, incendiary line of text. You all should see what your golden couple looks like when they think no one is watching. Then, as planned, the ghost account left the group. It had existed for less than a minute, a phantom assassin. We watched the screen, our breaths held. For a full minute, there was nothing. The message just sat there, a digital grenade with the pin pulled. Then, the first sign of life. My Uncle Robert, the one who had posted the picture from the bar, was the first to react. A single blue checkmark appeared next to the video. He had seen it. The screen came alive. Uncle Robert. What the hell is this? Is this some kind of joke? Cousin Sarah. Who sent this? Who was that who just joined and left? I don't recognize that account. The video, which we had kept short for maximum impact, began to download on their devices. Another minute passed in agonizing silence. Then, the explosion. The clip began with the sound of my mother's voice, thin and pleading. "Rick, please, just lower your voice. You'll wake Clara." Then his voice, a slurred, monstrous version of itself, boomed through the phone speakers. "I don't give a damn about Clara. I give a damn about the disrespect in my own house. You let her disrespect me." The camera, my hidden iPad, shook slightly as a heavy thump echoed him slamming his fist on the kitchen counter. Then the view shifted as he stormed toward the stairs. "I'll wake her up myself," he roared. The video ended with the terrifying, repeated thud of his fist against my bedroom door, each impact making the camera jump, his distorted face looming in the dim hallway light as he bellowed my name. Uncle Robert, my God. That's his voice. That's their house. Cousin David, is this real? This has to be fake. Some kind of deep fake thing, Sarah. You're good with computers. Is this real? Cousin Sarah. The audio isn't manipulated. The metadata is scrubbed, so I can't see the original device, but the video itself looks raw. It doesn't look faked. The messages started to flood in, a chaotic torrent of confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. They were a flurry of blue and gray bubbles, overlapping, interrupting, a digital panic attack. My more distant relatives were confused, asking who was shouting, what was happening. My father's side of the family, the ones who had been whispering their concerns for years, were ominously quiet, watching. And through it all, one person's name remained gray and silent at the top of the participant list. Mom. She was reading the messages. I could see the status update online, but she wasn't typing. Her silence was a vacuum in the center of the storm, and it was more damning than any confession. She was paralyzed, her fortress of denial being shelled into rubble in real time, in front of everyone she knew. She had nowhere to hide. Aunt Carol, Mom's sister, this is a private family matter. Whoever sent this should be ashamed of themselves. Airing dirty laundry like this. Uncle Robert dirty laundry. Carol, did you watch the video? He's drunk and threatening a kid? That's not laundry. That's a crime scene waiting to happen. They were choosing sides. The cracks in the family facade were splintering into canyons. Still, my mother was silent. I imagined her staring at her phone, her world collapsing into a 4-inch screen. The lies she had told herself and everyone else being systematically dismantled with every new message. She couldn't defend him. To defend this would be to admit she was a willing partner to it. But to condemn him would be to admit she had been wrong, had been a fool, for 7 years. So she did nothing. She hid in the silence he had taught her to value so much. June looked at me, her eyes wide. What do we do now? I knew what I had to do. The speculation, the debate over the video's authenticity, it had to end. I had to be the one to end it. I picked up my iPad, my fingers steady. I logged into my own account, the one they all knew. My profile picture, a smiling, hollow-eyed version of me from 2 Christmases ago, popped up in the chat. The typing indicator appeared next to my name. The frantic conversation stopped instantly. My 3 little dots, pulsing on the screen, had silenced the entire group. They were all waiting. I typed 1 sentence, 10 words. Real enough for me to file charges with the police. I hit send. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a digital void. No one typed. No one reacted with an emoji. It was as if I had thrown a switch and cut the power to the entire conversation. My 10 words had transformed the video from anonymous gossip into a confirmed, legal threat. I had just drawn a line in the sand, and every single person in that chat was now forced to decide which side they were on. I closed the app. I didn't need to see any more. The bomb had gone off, and the shockwave had done its work. An hour later, as June and I were drinking tea in a state of numb shock, my burner phone buzzed. It was a private message from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it had to be. It was Aunt Dana. "Clara, I saw the video. I saw what you wrote. I am so sorry we didn't do more. Your uncle and I are with you. 100%. Whatever you need, a place to stay, money, anything. We are with you. Just tell us what to do." Tears pricked my eyes for the first time that night. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a profound, earth-shattering relief. I wasn't alone. I had never truly been alone. Just as I was typing a reply to her, the phone began to buzz violently in my hand, the screen lighting up with a name I had blocked on my old phone, but not on this one, Rick. The sound was angry, demanding. It was a summons. He was trying to assert his control, to pull me back into his orbit with the force of his rage. The phone buzzed and buzzed, a trapped, furious hornet on the coffee table. June looked at it like it was a snake. "Don't answer it," she whispered. "I won't," I said calmly. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it started ringing again. He was frantic. He was losing control, and it was making him desperate. I watched the phone vibrate, and I felt a cold, satisfying sense of power. He could no longer touch me. He could no longer scream in my face. All he could do was send impotent sound waves into a device I controlled. On the third try, I silenced the call. When the screen went dark, I opened up a new text message. I typed his name. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. What could I say? What words could possibly encapsulate the 7 years of terror, the finality of this moment? And then it came to me. The perfect sentence. It was his own philosophy, his own weapon, turned back on him. I typed 2 short sentences, a question and a statement. "You taught me silence was a virtue, remember?" I hit send. Then I blocked his number and turned the phone off. I didn't need to hear his reply. The silence was my answer. The days that followed the leak were not filled with the thunder of confrontation, but with the slow, grinding sound of a world collapsing in on itself. The fallout didn't arrive as a single, devastating explosion, but as a creeping toxic radiation that poisoned everything it touched. I observed it all from the quiet safety of June's apartment, a general watching a battle unfold on a distant screen. The first casualty was Rick's career. The video, as these things do, had breached containment. We never found out exactly who leaked it beyond the family chat. Perhaps it was a cousin's spouse, or a friend they had shown it to in a moment of shocked gossip. The vector didn't matter. The result was the same. The 27-second clip of a drunken construction manager threatening to break down his stepdaughter's door was a liability his company, a firm that prided itself on its family values image in the community, could not afford. June delivered the news. Having heard it from our Uncle Robert, who still had a contact at Rick's old firm, he was called into a meeting with HR and the CEO. She said, reading from a text on her phone, they said he was being let go. Effective immediately. They called it conduct unbecoming of a senior manager. He hadn't been fired for what he did to me. He had been fired for the crime of being caught. His image, the carefully constructed facade of a hard-working, respectable man, had been shattered, and his employers had swept the shards off their pristine corporate doorstep. He had lost the one thing that gave him his power, his status as a provider, a king without a kingdom. The second casualty was my mother's social standing. Her silence in the group chat had been interpreted by everyone for exactly what it was, an admission of guilt. Her friends, the women she had coffee with, the neighbors she waved to, began to avoid her. Calls went unanswered. Invitations to book club dried up. Her sister, my Aunt Carol, who had initially tried to defend them, was now facing a rebellion within her own branch of the family. The narrative of a private matter had been annihilated by the raw, undeniable violence in the video. My mother was no longer seen as the long-suffering wife of a stressed husband. She was seen as an enabler, a co-conspirator in the architecture of my abuse. Her carefully manicured world of suburban pleasantries had turned on her. The silence she had cultivated for years had become her prison, its walls now built of shame and social exile. During this slow-motion demolition of their lives, I was building my own. With a loan from Aunt Dana and Uncle Robert offered without question or condition, I found a small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was on the third floor of a walk-up, with old hardwood floors and a window that looked out onto the branches of a large oak tree. The day I signed the lease and was handed a set of keys was the first day in 7 years that I felt the ground solidify beneath my feet. Walking into the empty apartment for the first time was a profound experience. The rooms echoed with every footstep. The air smelled of fresh paint. It was a blank slate. There were no ghosts here, no memories embedded in the drywall, no floorboards that creaked with menace. That evening, I sat on the floor in the empty living room, eating a sandwich and drinking a bottle of water, and I felt a sense of peace so deep it was almost painful. It was then that I received the call. My burner phone, which I now kept for official business, rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Am I speaking with Clara Wynne?" a man's voice asked. It was calm, professional. "This is she," I said. "Ms. Wynne, this is Detective Miller with the City Police Department. I'm calling in regard to the report you filed through the Domestic Violence Hotline and the evidence submitted by your legal counsel. Ms. Albright, I just wanted to inform you that we have reviewed the materials, and an official investigation has been opened into the actions of Mr. Rick Jensen." I held the phone to my ear, my knuckles white. An official investigation. The words had a weight, a gravity, that made them feel more real than anything else that had happened. This was no longer just a family drama playing out in a group chat. It had crossed a threshold into the real world, the world of consequences and laws. "A restraining order has been issued," the detective continued. "He is not to have any contact with you. If he attempts to call, text, or approach you, you are to call 911 immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes," I whispered. "I understand." After I hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, the silence of my new home wrapping around me. The family, as expected, was imploding. June kept me updated, acting as a filter for the toxicity. My father's side, led by Aunt Dana and Uncle Robert, had formed a protective wall around me. My mother's side was in disarray, torn between their loyalty to her and their horror at the video. Angry phone calls were exchanged. Accusations were made. Lifelong relationships were fractured. One evening, as June helped me paint a wall in my new bedroom, I felt a sudden, unexpected pang of something that felt dangerously like guilt. "Did I do this?" I asked quietly, looking at the chaos I had unleashed. "Did I ruin everyone?" June put her roller down and looked at me, her eyes fierce. "Listen to me. Clara," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You did not light the fire. You just stopped hiding in the smoke so everyone else could see the flames. You didn't ruin them. They were already ruined. They did this to themselves, and they did it to you. For years, all you did was turn on the lights." I nodded, the knot of guilt loosening in my chest. She was right. I hadn't been the cause of the disease. I had merely exposed the symptoms. But the feeling that lingered was complex. It was a strange cocktail of emotions that I couldn't quite name. It was the sharp, clean sting of pain mixed with the heady, disorienting rush of freedom. I was a bird who had finally escaped a cage, only to find that my wings were sore and the sky was a vast, intimidating space. A week after I moved in, an email appeared in the inbox of my anonymous account. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line was a single word, Clara. I opened it. "Please don't do this. You're tearing our family apart. This isn't you. He's lost his job. People are saying horrible things. We can fix this. Clara, I know we can. Just come home. We can go to counseling. We can be a family again. Please, just stop this. It was from my mother. The desperation bled through every word. The plea to fix it. The delusion that this was something that could be patched over with therapy and denial. The utter lack of acknowledgement of what had been done, of the years of silence, of the punch that had started it all. She wasn't sorry for what happened. She was sorry for the consequences. I stared at the email for a long time. There was no anger. There was no sadness. There was just a profound, hollow emptiness. I dragged the message to the trash folder without a reply. I clicked empty trash. It was a small, quiet act of finality. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The ghosts of the past week were too loud. I found myself reaching for my iPad, my fingers navigating to the messaging app on autopilot. I opened the Wynn family group chat. It was a digital archaeological site, a record of a civilization's collapse. I scrolled up, past the frantic messages, past the arguments, past my own 10-word declaration of war, past the video that had started it all. The chat was a wasteland now. No one had posted in days. But as I scrolled to the very bottom, I saw something I had missed in the initial chaos, a final message, posted hours after the initial leak, long after the arguments had died down, when the only thing left was the quiet hum of the fallout. It was a single sentence, from a single person, a whisper in the ruins. I wish I'd believed her sooner. The sender, Mom. I stared at the words on the screen. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was a statement of fact. A quiet, devastating confession made to an empty room. And in that moment, I understood. My victory wasn't Rick losing his job. It wasn't the police investigation or the restraining order. It was this single sentence. The true revenge wasn't making him hurt. It was making her see. My new apartment, with its quiet rooms and solid lock, was a sanctuary. But I learned quickly that safety was not the same as peace. The silence I had once craved now felt heavy, filled with the unprocessed anger of the past 7 years. My story was a coiled snake in my gut, and keeping it contained was starting to feel like its own form of poison. I needed to do more than just escape. I needed to speak. The decision was made late one night, scrolling through a social media feed filled with curated perfection smiling family portraits, glowing anniversary posts, pictures of homes that looked exactly like the one I had just fled. A wave of cold, clear rage washed over me. I opened a new post. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the words coming out sharp and polished, honed by years of silent observation. I chose a picture to accompany the text not of my bruises, but a photo I had taken months ago of the beige house, looking deceptively peaceful under a perfect blue sky, its lawn a pristine green. The text was short. To anyone hiding bruises behind family photos, to anyone explaining away the angry outbursts as just stress, to anyone who has been told that family drama should stay private, your silence is not a shield. It is the air your abuser breathes. It is the walls of the cage they keep you in. Your silence feeds them. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I hit post. I had expected a few comments from friends, maybe a handful of shares. I was not prepared for the deluge. By morning, the post had been shared over 1,000 times. By the end of the day, it was in the tens of thousands. My inbox was flooded with messages from strangers, hundreds of them, from all over the country. They were men and women, young and old. "This is my story," they wrote. "I thought I was the only one. Thank you for saying what I was too afraid to." I had thrown a single stone into a dark lake, and the ripples were spreading farther than I could have ever imagined. I had given a voice to a silent choir. 2 weeks later, an official email landed in my inbox. It was from a prominent women's support organization. They were hosting their annual fundraising gala, an event called Breaking the Quiet, and they had seen my post. They wanted to know if I would be willing to be their keynote speaker. My first instinct was to say no. Exposing the family secret in a group chat was one thing. Standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people felt like an entirely different level of exposure, but as I sat with the idea, I realized it was the necessary final step. Rick and my mother had controlled the narrative for years, defining me within the four walls of their house. This was my chance to define myself, in my own words, on my own terms, in a space they could not control. I spent a week writing the speech. I did not write it as a victim, I wrote it as a witness. My legal consultations with Ms. Albright had given me a new vocabulary, a language of cold, hard facts that was more powerful than any emotional plea. I wrote about the insidious nature of coercive control, the weaponization of financial dependence, and the devastating power of familial enablement. I wrote about the difference between a house and a home, between privacy and secrecy. I practiced the speech in my empty living room, my voice echoing off the bare walls, until I could get through the entire thing without a single tremor, my delivery as cold and unyielding as a legal deposition. The night of the event, I stood backstage, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum. I was not afraid. The woman who had trembled at the sound of heavy footsteps was gone. In her place was someone I was just beginning to know. When my name was called, I walked out into the bright, warm lights and stepped up to the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces, hundreds of people dressed in evening wear, their expressions attentive and supportive, and I began to speak. I told them my name. I told them my story. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply presented the evidence, laying out the facts of my case with a chilling, dispassionate clarity. We are taught that silence is a virtue, I said, my voice clear and amplified in the quiet hall. That what happens behind closed doors should stay there, but I am here to tell you that some doors need to be kicked open, because silence is not a sanctuary. It is a cage built by the abuser, and it is often locked from the inside by those who choose to look away. As I spoke, my eyes scanned the back of the room, and then I saw her. She was sitting in the last row, almost hidden in the shadows. My mother. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her shoulders slumped, her face pale and etched with an exhaustion that seemed to have settled deep into her bones. She was not the cold, defiant woman who had ordered me to block a number. She was a ruin. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second across the crowded room. She didn't look away. She just watched me, her expression unreadable, as I told the world the truth she had tried so desperately to conceal. Seeing her there did not break my stride. It solidified it. I was no longer just speaking to a room of strangers. I was speaking directly to her, and she had no choice but to listen. When I finished, there was a moment of absolute silence, followed by an eruption of applause that washed over me like a physical wave. I gave a small, tight nod, stepped away from the podium, and walked off the stage. For the next 20 minutes, I was surrounded by well-wishers, women with tears in their eyes, men shaking my hand with grim respect. I accepted their praise with a polite detachment, my gaze occasionally drifting to the back of the room. Finally, the crowd thinned, and I saw her approaching, moving with a hesitant, uncertain gait. She stopped a few feet away from me, as if there were an invisible barrier between us. We stood in a pocket of silence while the last of the guests filtered out of the hall. I saw the group chat, she said, her voice a low, rough whisper. What you wrote, the last message. She was referring to her own confession. I wish I'd believed her sooner. It wasn't an apology, it was a statement of fact, an admission she couldn't bring herself to make to my face. I know, I said. We stood there for another long moment. The chasm between us was vast, carved out by years of silence and betrayal. I felt nothing, not anger, not pity, just a vast, cold emptiness where a daughter's love was supposed to be. Took you long enough, I said finally. The words were not sharp or angry, they were just true. A simple, bitter statement of fact. She flinched, but she didn't argue. She just gave a small, defeated nod. Her eyes were filled with a weary sadness that I could not bring myself to comfort. "He's gone," she said quietly. "After the police came, I told him to leave. I packed his things. He's gone. Clara." This was her offering, her proof of action. The news that the monster was no longer in the house, a few months ago. Those words would have been the sweetest deliverance I could imagine. Now, they felt like a footnote, a detail from a story that was already over. He was a secondary character. He had never been the protagonist of my pain. She had. I looked at her, at this stranger who shared my blood, and I knew what she wanted. She wanted an embrace. She wanted a tearful reconciliation. She wanted me to say, "It's okay, Mom." She wanted absolution. I gave her none of it. I simply held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. I did not look back. I didn't need to. I didn't need to hug her. I didn't need her apology. As I walked out of the auditorium and into the cool night air, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I had thought my revenge was about the video, the police report, the public humiliation of Rick, but I was wrong. Rick was just a blunt instrument. The true, intricate, and devastating revenge had never been about making him hurt. It had been about this moment. It had been about forcing her to stand in the back of a crowded room and listen to the truth. It had been about making her open her eyes. A week after the gala, Ms. Albright called. The police had finished their preliminary investigation at the house. The locks had been changed, and the keys were waiting for my mother at the station. There were some personal effects I had left behind: yearbooks, old photo albums, things that had no place in my new life, but which I wasn't ready to abandon entirely. She asked if I would be willing to go with my mother to retrieve them, to act as a neutral party. I agreed, not for my mother, but for myself. I needed to see the place one last time. Driving back into that neighborhood was like entering a dream I had fought for years to forget. The manicured lawns, the identical mailboxes, the oppressive sense of order, it all looked the same, but I was different. The fear that used to tighten my chest as I turned onto my old street was gone, replaced by a kind of detached, clinical curiosity. I was a visitor to a museum of my own pain. I saw the house from the end of the block, and I saw her. She was standing on the sidewalk, a solitary figure next to the perfectly edged grass, but it was the front door that held my gaze. Stretched across it was a wide band of yellow police tape, the black block letters reading "Crime Scene Do Not Cross." The words were a brutal, public validation. The tape transformed the house from a place of private shame into a site of public record. It was no longer my word against theirs. The house itself now bore the evidence of its own sickness. I pulled the car over to the curb and killed the engine. The silence that filled the car was heavy, broken only by the soft ticking of the cooling engine. My mother didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the yellow tape as if it were a physical manifestation of her failure. In her hand, she held the handle of a small, navy blue suitcase, the kind one takes for an overnight trip. It looked absurdly small and pathetic next to the large, two-story house. I got out of the car. The air was cool and clean. I walked to her, stopping a few feet away, mirroring the distance she had kept from me at the gala. We both looked at the house, at the sealed door. It was a tomb, and the ghosts of the life we once had were trapped inside. She finally turned to look at me. Her face was hollowed out, the skin around her eyes thin and bruised-looking from lack of sleep. She had aged a decade in the last few weeks. The defiance was gone. The cold certainty was gone. All that was left was a woman adrift, her anchor torn away. "They won't let me in without you," she said, her voice flat. "The lawyer said you had to be here." "I know," I said. We stood there in silence for another minute. Strangers united by a shared catastrophe. The weight of everything we weren't saying pressed down on the air around us. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the breeze. "Can I stay with you for a few days?" she asked, her eyes fixed on a crack in the sidewalk. "Just until I can figure things out. The motel, I don't have much money left." The question hung in the air between us. It was a surrender, a complete reversal of the universe we had inhabited for so long. She, the matriarch, the enforcer of the rules, was now homeless, asking for shelter from the daughter she had helped to cage. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it was dizzying. Part of me, a dark, vengeful part, wanted to say no. I wanted to leave her standing on this sidewalk with her tiny suitcase and her ruined life. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the helplessness I had felt for years. But I didn't say anything. I thought of her final message in the group chat. I thought of her standing alone in the back of that auditorium, forced to listen to the truth. My revenge was complete. This was not about revenge anymore. This was about the messy, complicated aftermath. I turned without a word, walked back to my car, and opened the passenger door. The gesture was heavy, deliberate. It was not an invitation born of warmth or forgiveness. It was a practical, necessary step, an acknowledgement of a shared reality. She looked at the open door for a long moment, then slowly, like a very old woman, she walked over, put her small suitcase in the back, and got into the car. I drove away from that house and did not look back. The silence in the car was absolute, more profound than any silence that house had ever held. It was the silence of a battlefield after the war is over. We drove through the quiet suburban streets, the engine a low hum. I turned on the radio, needing to fill the space with something other than our shared history. A local news station was on, the announcer's voice a calm, even drone. We were stopped at a red light when the story came on. And in local news, the announcer said, his voice the sound of mundane tragedy. The domestic violence case involving prominent local contractor Rick Jensen continues to develop. Sources say police are reviewing extensive digital evidence as part of their ongoing investigation. I saw her hands clench in her lap. Her head turned sharply toward the passenger side window, away from me, as if the announcer's words were a physical blow she was trying to avoid. The light turned green, and I accelerated. The announcer moved on to a story about a zoning dispute. A small, choked sound escaped her. I glanced over. Her shoulders were shaking. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, then another. She was crying silently. Her face turned away, watching the world blur past through the window. The old Clara, the girl who had been conditioned for years to manage her mother's emotions, would have reached out. She would have offered a tissue, a comforting word. She would have tried to fix it, but that girl was gone. I kept my hands firmly on the steering wheel. I kept my eyes on the road. Her tears were not my responsibility, not anymore. I let her cry. After a long time, her quiet sobs subsided. We drove on in silence. As we merged onto the highway, the first light of morning was beginning to break on the horizon. A thin line of pale gold appeared, pushing back against the deep purple of the fading night. I finally spoke, my voice even, my eyes still fixed on the road ahead. At least now, someone believes me. The words were not meant to be cruel, but they weren't kind, either. They were a simple statement of the new world we lived in, a world where my truth was no longer up for debate. She didn't turn to look at me. She just stared out the window at the changing sky. Her reply was a whisper, so faint I could barely hear it over the sound of the tires on the pavement. Everyone saw the group chat. Clara, everyone knows. It was the closest she would ever come to an apology, an admission of the absolute, undeniable, public nature of her failure. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I looked out my own window, at the vast, open sky that was slowly filling with light. The colors bled into one another gold, then pink, then a soft, hopeful blue. The sun was rising, and as I watched it, a feeling I couldn't remember having before settled deep in my bones. It was a profound quietness, a stillness. For the first time in my adult life, I realized I was driving toward a new day. And I wasn't afraid of the sound of footsteps behind me. The week my mother lived on the pull-out sofa in my living room was the longest and quietest week of my life. We did not talk about what had happened. We did not talk about Rick, or the house, or the future. We coexisted in the small, sunlit space like two polite, traumatized strangers. She moved with a quietness I had never seen in her, as if afraid of taking up too much space. She washed her own cup and plate the moment she was finished with them. She read old paperback novels I had picked up at a thrift store. She folded her blankets into a perfect, neat square every morning. I watched her, not with forgiveness, but with a kind of weary, anthropological curiosity. The formidable woman who had stood by silently as I was struck, who had commanded me with icy authority, was gone. In her place was this diminished version, a woman hollowed out by the collapse of her own denial. She was a refugee, and I, her estranged daughter, was the reluctant port in her storm. There was no warmth between us, no tearful reconciliation. There was only the shared, unspoken acknowledgement of the wreckage. On the third day, she spent the morning on the phone with a lawyer, her voice a low, steady murmur from the other room. It was the first time I had heard a hint of her old decisiveness. A week to the day after she had arrived on my doorstep, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Aunt Dana. There was no text, just 2 attachments. The first was a photo. It was a news photograph, clearly taken with a long lens, grainy and immediate. It showed Rick, unshaven and wearing a stained sweatshirt, being led out of a cheap motel by 2 uniformed police officers. His hands were cuffed behind his back. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, pathetic shock. He looked small, powerless, a bully stripped of his stage and his audience. The second attachment was a scanned document. It was the first page of a petition for dissolution of marriage, filed in family court. The petitioner's name was my mother's. The respondent was Rick Jensen. The date of filing was that morning. I stared at the images on my phone's bright screen. This was it, the final, definitive end, the legal, documented conclusion to the war. I had imagined this moment for years, fantasized about it. I thought I would feel a surge of triumphant joy, a cathartic release of vengeful satisfaction, but I didn't. I felt no happiness. I felt no anger. I felt nothing at all for a long moment, and then a profound sense of quiet settled over me. It was the quiet of a snow-covered field after a blizzard, the quiet of a hospital room after a long fever finally breaks. It was the sound of a story ending. The war was over, and all that was left was the vast, silent landscape of what came next. My phone buzzed again, a text from June. "You did it." I looked at her message, at the 2 simple words that carried the weight of our shared journey. I thought of her voice on the secret phone, the screenshots she had sent, the way she had held me when I showed up at her door, bruised and broken. I thought of Aunt Dana and Uncle Robert and the money they had sent. No questions asked. I thought of the family members who had finally stood up and spoken out. My fingers moved across the screen. We did. It was the truest thing I had ever written. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the oak tree, its leaves just beginning to turn. The air outside was clean. The sky was a calm, cloudless blue. A new chapter had begun, and it required a final, symbolic act. I sat down on my sofa, my mother still quiet in the other room, and opened the messaging app on my iPad. I navigated to the group chat, Win Family. The name itself felt like a lie, a relic from a past I no longer recognized. It was a name that spoke of a unity that had been a fiction, a name that had provided cover for years of silent suffering. My fingers hovered over the edit button. This space, which had been a courtroom, a battlefield, and a confessional, now needed to become something else. It needed to be a monument. With a few quick taps, I deleted the old title. In its place, I typed 2 new words. No more silence. I hit save. The notification appeared in the chat for all to see. Clara has changed the group name to No More Silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single red heart emoji appeared next to the notification, a reaction from June, then another from Aunt Dana, then an icon of a flame from Uncle Robert. Within a minute, a cascade of hearts and flames filled the screen, a silent, digital ovation from the family that had chosen to stand with me, the family that had chosen to see. It was a quiet, powerful consensus. We were all survivors, and this was our new charter. But a monument needs more than just a new name. It needs a clean foundation. My thumb pressed down on the screen, and the option to clear chat history appeared. I scrolled back, my eyes scanning the years of digital history I was about to erase. I saw my mother's cheerful deflections. Everything is fine. Rick is just tired. I saw the unanswered questions from concerned relatives. Is Clara okay? I saw the mundane chatter that had served as wallpaper over the rot. I saw the angry, chaotic messages from the night of the leak. It was a timeline of our collective dysfunction. It was a record of pain, and I had no more use for it. I pressed delete. The app asked me if I was sure. I was. In a flash, it was all gone. Years of history, wiped clean. The chat was now a blank slate, empty except for the new title and the reactions of my family. But it wasn't quite right. To forget entirely is to risk repeating. The past needed to be acknowledged, not erased completely. I scrolled through my own camera roll, through the evidence I had saved. I found the screenshot I had taken from my iPad in the darkness of my old bedroom. It was the message that had started it all, the order that had been the breaking point. With careful precision, I posted the image into the now empty chat. The stark black and white text appeared, a lone artifact in the clean space. "Block her number," Mom ordered. The words just hung there, a testament to how far we had come. It was an accusation, but it was also a historical record. It was the foundation of our new beginning. I looked at the message, the ghost of my mother's command, and I knew it needed a reply. It needed a final word. My word. I typed a new message directly below the screenshot. A direct response sent years too late, but right on time. Unblocked, forever. I hit send. My 2 words appeared directly underneath hers. An answer, a verdict, and a promise. That was it. There was nothing more to say. The story had been told. The silence had been broken. The verdict had been rendered. I held my finger down on the power button of my burner phone. The screen prompted me to slide to power off. I did. I did the same with my personal phone. The screens went dark, the constant connection to the world, the pings, the notifications, the endless stream of information. I shut it all down. The battle was over. The digital weapons could be laid down. I sat back on my sofa in the quiet of my apartment. The only sound, the soft rustle of leaves outside my window. The silence was no longer a threat. It was not a punishment. It was not a cage. It was peace. It was mine. The silence in my new apartment was a physical presence, a texture in the air. It was not the suffocating, watchful silence of the beige house, but a clean, expansive quiet that belonged only to me. Evening light, the color of old gold, slanted through the single large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, lazy stars. The city hummed a distant lullaby 4 stories below. This quiet was the sound of my freedom, a sound I was still learning to trust. I was sitting on the floor, my back against the cool drywall of a freshly painted wall, my laptop warm in my lap. For the past hour, I had been looking at the screen, not typing, not working, just observing. The group chat was open. No more silence. The name felt like a constitution, a founding document for a new kind of family. Below it, my last message and the screenshot of my mother's original order stood as a permanent record, a declaration of independence. It was the last page of a long, dark chapter. As the sun dipped below the neighboring rooftops, casting long shadows across my floor, a new notification bubbled up at the bottom of the screen. I watched the 3 dots pulse for a moment, my heart giving a single, hard beat of anticipation. The name next to the indicator was Mom. My mother, still living on my sofa, had said almost nothing to me for a week. Now, here she was, in the space where the revolution had taken place. What final words could there be? An excuse, a justification, a plea. The message that appeared was none of those things. It was a single, perfect, bright red heart emoji. It sat there at the bottom of the chat, a tiny digital glyph loaded with a universe of unspoken meaning. It was a white flag. It was a plea for a truce. It was, in its own way, the only apology she was capable of giving, an apology that contained no admission of guilt, an appeal to an emotion she herself had long since helped to extinguish in me. A few years ago, that heart would have undone me. It would have been a lifeline, a sign that the mother I missed was still in there, and I would have grabbed it, desperate for a reconciliation at any cost. But I was not that girl anymore. I looked at the heart, and I felt a profound and complete neutrality. It was like looking at a word in a foreign language I had once spoken fluently but had now forgotten. The symbol was meant to trigger an emotional response, a Pavlovian rush of daughterly love and obligation, but the bell had been rung too many times. There was no response left to give. The heart was not a bridge. It was a ghost, a faint echo of a bond that had been severed not by my anger, but by her silence. It was a message from a woman who still did not understand that some things, once broken, could never be truly fixed. They could only be survived. I stared at the little red heart for a few seconds longer. I did not reply. I did not react. I simply observed it. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I reached out and closed the lid of my laptop. The screen went dark, and the click of the closing lid was a sound of quiet finality in the room. The conversation was over. The case was closed. My eyes drifted from the dark, silent laptop to the wall beside me. Yesterday, June and Aunt Dana had come over to help me unpack the last of my things. Before they left, June had handed me a small, wrapped gift. It was a simple black frame. Inside was a picture she had taken on her phone a few days ago, when the three of us had gone out for coffee. In the photo, we were squeezed together in a booth, laughing, not posing, not smiling for a camera, but genuinely, unreservedly laughing. My head was thrown back. June's eyes were crinkled at the corners, and Aunt Dana had a look of pure, uncomplicated joy on her face. It was a portrait of a different kind of family, one forged not in obligation or shared genetics, but in shared truth and unwavering support. It was a family I had chosen, and that had chosen me back. That picture was my future. The heart emoji on the screen was my past. The last of the sun's golden light faded from the room, leaving it bathed in the soft, deep blue of twilight. The shadows deepened, but they weren't menacing. They were gentle, calming. The darkness was a blanket, a comfort. It was a space I commanded, a quiet I owned. A soft, almost musical chime sounded from the coffee table where I'd left my phone. I reached for it, the screen lighting up my face in the dim room. It was another notification from the group chat. I almost ignored it, but a sense of finality compelled me to look. It was a new message from my Uncle Robert. It was 2 words, stark and powerful against the blue-gray background of the app. Justice served. I read the words, and a slow, quiet smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of triumph or glee. It was a smile of peace, of closure. The legal system had finally, officially, acknowledged what we all knew to be true. The last piece of the story had been written. Rick was a headline, my mother was a cautionary tale, and I was free. I set the phone down, the screen going dark. I didn't need to see any more. I didn't need to exact any more pain. I didn't need to prove any more points. The burning, all-consuming need for revenge had been a fire that had kept me warm in the coldest, darkest years of my life. But I was out of the darkness now. I was in my own home, in my own quiet, in my own light, and I no longer needed the fire. No more revenge was necessary. No more words were needed. The group chat had said everything for me. The screen goes dark. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you'd like to help it reach even more people who might need to hear it, please hit the hype button to give it an extra boost. Your support means the world.